Hey, what's up, guys? All right, continuing the World War One, the German military. We got the U-boats of the Kaiser's navies. Now, the last video I did, we did the airships. You have this amazing technology at the turn of the century that has like never been, I would say, never been seen before at the levels they were. Obviously, you had a submarine military action in the Civil War. I'm still gonna do that Hunley vid for the new Vanguard book of that, but the unlike the airships and the submarines, of course, divergently, one was very unsuccessful, like you had seen the airships. This thing wasn't thought much of. This almost had Germany. They almost came close to winning with these things. Okay, it was interesting to see and how the war developed, to see how these things were used by trial and error, to how effective they were in countering the British blockade of Germany in the North Sea. Right? You're gonna starve us, Britisher. We're gonna try to starve you back. Now going here, it's interesting. Of course, the U-boats. You see, this is the first one. The first one, guess what? It was called U-1. Right, first submarine taken into service. It was based on a Russian design, not a Russian design. It was based on a design they had based off a French design that they were going to make for Russia, and then they made one for themselves. It was interesting, the propulsion of it. Of course, these early U-boats used paraffin wax because apparently the Americans were trying to make submarines with petrol, right, gasoline. The Holland class, I guess, the Union had. Remember, the Union had submarines they had made themselves during the Civil War. And they were trying to, I guess, develop these, but the petrol engines driving the ship underneath caused a bunch of explosions. So the Germans found using paraffin-driven wax to be safer. Of course, under the water, you had to use electric, right? Electric motors. Oh, Elon Musk, you're such a genius in the 21st century. They had electric motors back then. Of course, they had to have these tubes, right, to let the ventilator tubes. And this is the problem. Okay, underneath you're running on electricity. You gotta charge your batteries at some point, so you gotta go on the surface. But of course, you see many people were trying to make submarines. Being an amateur submarine designer in the 19th century or now is a very dangerous hobby. Everybody's always drowning, right, when these things sink. He actually made one that was lost in 1851, but I guess they got out. It was later raised in 1887 and is still in existence today in a museum. Cool. Of course, there were other inventors, Vogel and what is this, Howald. Of course, a lot of these were not successful either, but one eventually was, right, in 1897. But it wasn't really useful for the military. Finally, they made one that was successful, this one here, but of course the electric motor. Now going on, of course, they start building these things. You see, the Germans, very logical. They just number them, U5 to U8. They start making them bigger, right? They start making engines with diesel, right? And when the war breaks out, they have about 28 different U-boats of different sizes ready for action. Of course, what were they going to do? Right? You'll see. Of course, the periscopes on the early U-boats were very short in length. They were literally just under the surface of the water, using the Carl Zeiss optics. Right? So now the war begins. Meanwhile, real cool. Look at they make little ones too. Those are cool. They call them tadpoles. Very interesting. So you're making little ones and you're making big ones, all for different things. Obviously, the range of the larger ones for the open ocean. These are more coastal. We have mine-laying submarines, right? Laying mines is very useful. Right? Also, you also had, and this is in the Civil War. Everyone knows of the Hunley. Okay, the Hunley destroyed the Houstonic, but it also went down. It wasn't found for more than a century. But there was a recorded incident of another submarine that was scuttled, that was used not for combat. It was used to sneak supplies and stuff underneath the Union blockade. Okay, and these merchant U-boats were doing the same. The original one, the Deutschland, was actually a commercial vessel. Interesting. You had the same thing in the Civil War with the Confederacy, but eventually, just like the Confederacy, the German government eventually took control of these things. And interesting, they had a maiden voyage to. They went to Baltimore, right, when Baltimore was still safe. Of course, they had some problems as it went on, but America, interesting, a country. You have most of the population is of German descent. You have a lot of Irish people. Support for Britain is not going to be a given. Okay, not even talking about the revolutionary times, but you're saying that Britain is desperately wants America to get into the war. Everyone knows this. So what's going to happen? Eventually, look, you get to see this. It's just like, oh, we make all the engines and all the parts, and then we find a way to fit you in. So, oh man, these guys have balls of steel to do this. Y'all would never do that. I'd rather be in a tank than this. Right? Of course, they have these surface guns. Remember, a lot of the action, these things couldn't stay underwater that long. The range wasn't that great in the beginning. The idea was you were going to be like ironically, you're going to be like a Confederate raider. I went over those during the war. You're gonna stand and deliver and pretty much price sink the merchant ship. You can't really take the stuff, right? So you're going to be like the Confederate raiders, where they were just destroying and sinking merchant vessels, right? A way to get back, to counter their blockade of you. You're going to blockade with them. So now you get the cool. This is U1. You get the cool painted artwork, of course. In the beginning, right? The Navy didn't really have much expectations for them. Little was expected of these things. Okay, so now over time, like with the airships were shown to be kind of problematic. These, on the other hand, it was interesting. They went on patrols to find enemies to fight, and like most of the U-boat stuff, you didn't really find many. Although one ran into a British ship and got rammed and sunk by another one. Hey. But eventually these things start to heat up, and look at this cool schematic. This is a more medium-sized submarine. Look, it's not that big. Can you imagine being in this? I couldn't. You get the cool artwork. That looks like the Nemo, right? Right, the Nemo was destroying ships. Remember, obviously, that Jules Verne story was probably inspired by what the Confederates had done during the war. Not just with the Hunley, but like I said, with the Confederate commerce raiders. So now we start to get some nice action here. We get Otto Hersink, the lieutenant, sinks a British cruiser. Then we get Otto Vedegate in a crazy fight. He takes out 3 British military ships. And at one point, like I said, with their they had very short periscopes. They were barely just under the surface. While they were trying to reload their torpedoes, which was a very tedious process for the early ones, the ship broke the surface, and they saw it, and the other boats started to go after them, and it was just, who got the first shot off, and the Germans got the first shot off and won. And they even made a cool patriotic postcard. Kamerad, good job, man. The Untersee, right? The Untersee boat, right? U-9. And he had destroyed 36,000 tons of enemy warships in a mere few minutes. Now, so you have a lot of these battles here, right? You got Scapa Float. You got all these battles where they're fighting other military British ships, but they find that sinking the merchant ships is easier and a lot more effective, and in the end, actually does more damage. It's their own blockade of the Brits. And you got the awesome photos. Look at this. It's cool. You got the little coastal sub and one of the bigger ones here. Interesting. And it goes on. Of course, in terms of U-boats and America in the war, one of the biggest notorious things was the Lusitania. Right? The Walter Schweiger torpedo that sank the line of Lusitania, believing it to be carrying troops. He was wrong. It wasn't carrying troops. It was carrying munitions. Ammunition and other contraband war material. Okay, now it's interesting too. Like I said, it was listed in Jane's fighting ships in 1914 as an armed merchant cruiser. Of course, the thing with the Lusitania was you had Americans on there. The Germans had warned, don't have your ships in this area. Why would you have civilians on a ship that is bringing war supplies to you? Do you want to use these people as some kind of bait, maybe, to get America into the war, Churchill? Of course not. So, jeez. I mean, it's so bloody obvious, right? And of course, this was bad. This was, very bad on the world stage. So eventually the Admiralty of the German Navy was like, okay, you must use the strict prize regulations. Okay, you have to surface, you have to establish the cargo, ensure the evacuation and safety of the crew before sinking her. And it was method of attack was honorable, though laudable, but it exposed any submarine to immediate counterattack. So you can see that would you know what would have happened, right? Well, it did happen. You had the Q ships where they would try to trick the submarine into coming to the surface, and then this Q ship would have hidden guns to try to sink it. And you actually had a notorious incident. What is this? U-27 fell afoul of a Q ship while attacking another ship. The U-boat was fatally damaged. The crew evacuated and took shelter on the very merchant ship they had first attacked. Armed sailors from the Q ship hunted down the German sailors and killed all of them on the pretext of preventing information leaking back to Germany and the true identity of the Q ships. Listen, man, I've read a lot of military history of those wars, okay? The English-speaking people, they all killed a lot of German prisoners and German soldiers all the time who were not a threat. But you only hear about the much smaller return, which was usually a mistake or something done in anger. Okay? I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm tired of this. So the English-speaking world is getting what it deserves. Okay? All right, come on, you. And this is an interesting guy, Capitan Lieutenant Lothar Arnold de la Perriere. That's interesting. This guy is must be a mixed German. He accounted for 50 ships in a rampage in the Mediterranean lasting 3 weeks. Literally a one-man operation in the Mediterranean. He only used 4 torpedoes. His main attack thing was to attack with the 88mm deck gun. His officer would become the greatest U-boat ace of all time. He was a chivalrous sailor. Right? He made certain the crews of the ships attacked were given sufficient time to evacuate and were provided with directions for the nearest landfall. So this guy was an example of like an honorable guy doing the prize regulations and causing a lot of damage to the war effort, but not killing anybody. So now we had 10 U-boats were lost in 1916, but the damage they had done had been tenfold more. Okay, but what is this? Buoyed by the successes and having seen peace overtures towards the Allies rejected in December. Yes, did you know that in 1916 the Germans were like, hey, this is getting out of hand now after 2 years. Let's have some peace. Oh, no. Why would you want that? You Germans are winning. That's why you want peace. We're gonna fight till we beat you, no matter how many of our young men die. All right, come on, you. All right, so now, right, even in 1917, merchant shipping reaching British ports was reduced to almost 75% compared with the previous year's average. It was working, man. It was working. You could argue that what they were trying to do with what they had was a lot more impressive than having the biggest navy in the world and just blockading a literally landlocked country for the most part, except for a narrow strip. Okay, not to mention, of course, the whole thing with the North Sea, right? The idea that the British Navy, the British military, had done this thing, right? They had declared the entire North Sea as a prohibited zone in November of 1914, right? Early on, okay? Itself, technically, a breach of international law. Technically, it was a breach of international law. What is the law? The law is who gets away with it, who has the power. That's the law, right? Better hope that it's not on the other side someday. Come on. It's already happening. This is interesting. The new H2 mine. This is the mine you think of when it has all the detonator horns sticking out. It's fascinating, man. Fascinating history. Of course, eventually you know what happens. Okay, it's just not enough. The British start using more mines. They start using convoys, right? Convoys. Now, of course, the Germans were not able to really get anywhere at this point. What they could have done, right? The only true answer to concentrating merchant ships and convoys protection was to concentrate U-boat forces together. And they had tried on 2 occasions to do that. The first time at Jutland, it was not successful, but they only had 3 U-boats for that. They were going to try it again, but as the war was coming to an end, right, the high seas fleet began to assemble. Mutiny broke out on many of the larger warships. If you know the history of it, the Navy, the sailors. You know, I don't like sailors, right? Although my uncle was a sailor, but sailors, right? Many of them were became Reds, and the Navy mutinied, and you had all these issues, right? It's like what had happened in Russia just 2 years earlier. The Navy was in no position to prosecute this latest plan, right? The U-boat crews, however, remained loyal to the end, right? So the whole thing here was that if they had done the Wolf Pack thing, where they concentrated U-boats together, attacking in groups, in the first war, they might have been able to do something here, okay? They only really did it in the second war, okay, where sufficiently advanced anti-submarine measures were available, you know. But in the first war, it might have succeeded, but I mean, they're lucky they fought as long as they did, right? Fascinating book. Fascinating. They mention here, Arkham, maybe you could find, you probably, for all I know, you have this book already. He mentions one of the best books on this. It's amazing. Some of the best books on the German military are in German. Can you believe that? You know, I'm only reading English language things, and I can't seem to get this page. And I read all these, like a certain author had said, all the things about the war were in we're not even looking at the primary sources that were in German. Well, a British man, ironically, did something about that. I think you know his name, right? But I don't know. Yeah, this boat here, right? Rossler, what is this? Rossler Eberhard, Geschichte des deutschen U-Boot-Baus-Band von 1986. Hard to imagine a book written on any technical aspect of the U-boat that does not owe a great debt to Rossler's work. Finest, most detailed study ever written. Maybe, Arkham Report, you don't have that book, maybe you could get it. So anyway, I spent a lot of time on this one, but this was amazing, man. This was amazing. These guys had such balls, just like the airship guys, and these guys had some success. All right, man. We're gonna cover some more.